Pastor Canuthia found himself drawn back to whispers again and again. He couldn't explain the pull he felt, the strange magnetism that drew him to the dimly lit bar with its scent of stale beer and lingering perfume. Pastor Michael Canuthia was a man of God. His sermons were legendary, filled with fire and brimstone, then overflowing with the honeyed sweetness of God's love. He was a tall man, built like the oak trees that dotted the Aberdare ranges, his skin the color of rich, dark soil after a rain shower. His voice, a deep baritone that resonated with authority, could soothe the most troubled soul or shake the foundations of doubt. Pastor Canuthia cut a striking figure as he traversed the dusty paths of Caratina town, his black Bible clutched firmly in his large hand. His crisp white shirts seemed to glow against his dark skin, and his smile, when it came, was like the sun breaking through the clouds. He was a beacon of hope in a town struggling with poverty and disillusionment, a man who seemed to carry the weight of his congregation's burdens upon his broad shoulders. Every Sunday, the small church on the hill would overflow with people eager to hear Pastor Canuthia's sermons. They came from far and wide, drawn by his charisma and the solace they found in his words. He spoke of love, of forgiveness, of the unwavering power of faith. He preached of a God who saw their struggles, who heard their prayers, who promised them a brighter tomorrow. And in his words, they found a glimmer of hope, a reason to keep going. Across town, in a small, dimly lit bar named Whispers, Amina lived a different kind of existence. Her life was a melody, a tapestry woven from the threads of music, laughter, and the bittersweet tang of heartache. She was a woman of the night, a siren whose voice could lure you in with its intoxicating beauty. Her voice, a husky alto that spoke of long nights and whispered secrets, was her instrument, her weapon, her salvation. Amina was a vision in red silk, her curves accentuated by the fabric that clung to her like a second skin. Her skin, the color of polished mahogany, gleamed under the stage lights, and her eyes, large and expressive, held a depth that hinted at 1,000 untold stories. She moved with an effortless grace, her body swaying to the rhythm of the music that flowed from her soul. Every night, Amina poured her heart and soul into her music. Her songs were a reflection of her life, a mixture of joy and sorrow, love and loss, hope and despair. She sang of broken hearts and second chances, of dreams shattered and reborn. Her voice had the power to transport her listeners to another world, a world where pain was temporary and love reigned supreme. Pastor Canuthia and Amina lived in two different worlds, their paths as divergent as the rising sun and the setting moon. He walked in the light, a shepherd guiding his flock towards salvation. She danced in the shadows, a temptress weaving her magic with every note. Their worlds were not meant to collide, their lives not destined to intersect. One humid Tuesday evening, an unexpected downpour lashed Caratina town. The rain came suddenly, a torrent of water that turned the dusty streets into muddy rivers. People scurried for cover, seeking refuge from the relentless downpour. Pastor Canuthia, caught off guard on his way back from visiting a sick member of his congregation, found himself seeking shelter in the most unlikely of places, Whispers. He stood awkwardly just inside the entrance, his crisp white shirt now clinging to his skin, his Bible clutched tightly in his hand. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the scent of cheap beer. Laughter, loud and boisterous, filled the small space. It was a world away from the quiet sanctity of his church, and yet there was a strange sense of comfort in the chaos. Perhaps it was the shared human experience of seeking refuge from the storm, or perhaps it was something more. Whatever it was, Pastor Kinuthia couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity about this place, about the people who called it home. The bar was dim, lit by flickering neon signs, and the occasional candle on a table. Pastor Kinuthia, his eyes still adjusting to the change in light, felt a pang of discomfort as he took in his surroundings. Men and women, their faces hidden in the shadows, huddled around tables, their voices a low murmur against the backdrop of the storm raging outside. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, and something else, something unfamiliar yet strangely alluring. He hesitated, unsure whether to turn back or brave the unknown. His upbringing, steeped in the strict doctrines of his church, had taught him to avoid places like this, places where temptation lurked in every shadow. Yet, there was something about the warmth emanating from within, a sense of camaraderie that transcended the smoke and the dim lighting. That drew him in. As if sensing his discomfort, a figure detached itself from the shadows and approached him. It was a woman, her face hidden behind a curtain of beaded braids. "Welcome, brother," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Seeking shelter from the storm?" Pastor Kinuthia nodded, clutching his Bible tighter, his knuckles white against the worn leather. "Come," the woman beckoned, leading him towards an empty table in the corner. "A little rain never hurt anyone, and it's always a good time for company." He settled into the rickety chair, his discomfort slowly giving way to a strange sense of peace. The storm outside seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. He watched as the woman moved through the bar, her laughter ringing out like a melody, her presence a comforting constant in the dimly lit space. A hush fell over the bar as a figure took to the small stage tucked away in the corner. It was Amina, radiant in a dress of shimmering gold, her silhouette highlighted by a single spotlight. She held a microphone in her hand, her eyes closed, and for a moment she seemed to be drawing strength from the silence. Pastor Kinuthia, caught off guard by her sudden appearance, found himself holding his breath. Then she began to sing. Her voice, a husky alto that seemed to rise from the depths of her soul, filled the small space, each note a story in itself. It was a song of love and loss, of hope and despair, of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Pastor Kinuthia, a man who had dedicated his life to the Word of God, found himself captivated by the language of music. He couldn't understand the words, not really, for Amina sang in a language he didn't recognize. But somehow, it didn't matter. Her voice transcended language, speaking directly to his heart, stirring emotions he didn't know he possessed. He watched, mesmerized, as she poured her heart and soul into the song, her every gesture, every inflection of her voice, conveying a depth of feeling that was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the last note faded away, a smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then gaining momentum until the small bar reverberated with appreciation. Amina, her eyes shining with unshed tears, smiled, a radiant smile that illuminated the room. She bowed gracefully, then disappeared behind the heavy velvet curtain that served as a backdrop for the stage. Pastor Kinuthia sat in stunned silence, his senses still reeling from the sheer power of Amina's performance. He had never experienced anything like it, this raw outpouring of emotion, this vulnerability laid bare for all to see. It was both beautiful and terrifying, and he felt a strange mix of admiration and apprehension for the woman who could evoke such feelings in him. The woman who had welcomed him to the bar returned, a knowing smile on her face. "That was Amina," she said, her voice barely audible above the renewed hum of conversation. "She has a gift, doesn't she?" Pastor Kinuthia, still struggling to find his voice, simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the spot where Amina had stood just moments ago. "She's a good woman," the woman continued, her voice softening. "Life hasn't been easy for her, but she finds solace in her music. It's her escape, her salvation." Pastor Kinuthia, his curiosity piqued, finally found his voice. "Salvation," he echoed, the words sounding foreign in the dimly lit bar. "Isn't that what I preach at church every Sunday?" The woman laughed, a throaty sound that seemed to reverberate through the room. "Perhaps," she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "But salvation comes in many forms, my friend. For some, it's found in the pages of a holy book. For others, it's in the melody of a song, the rhythm of a dance, the warmth of a shared moment." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "Don't be so quick to judge, Pastor. Life is full of surprises." Her words, spoken with such conviction, struck a chord within him. Pastor Kinuthia, a man who had always lived by the rigid rules of his faith, found himself questioning his beliefs, his convictions. Could it be that salvation, that elusive state of grace he preached about every Sunday, could be found in the most unexpected of places? Could it be that Amina, a woman who lived a life so different from his own, possessed a truth that he, a man of God, had failed to grasp? He looked at the stage, now empty, and for a moment he imagined Amina standing there, her voice soaring above the noise and chaos, her words reaching out to touch the souls of those who listened. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to her than met the eye. Perhaps beneath the glamorous exterior, beneath the layers of makeup and the shimmering dress, beat the heart of a woman searching for something more, something real, something true. He realized with a start that he wanted to know more about her, about this woman who could move him with a single song. He wanted to understand the pain that lingered in her voice, the hope that shone in her eyes. He wanted to know what secrets lay hidden beneath the surface, what stories she carried within her heart. The rain outside had stopped, leaving behind a silence that was almost deafening. Pastor Kinuthia rose to his feet, his gaze still fixed on the stage. He had come to this place seeking shelter from the storm, but he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he had found something far more profound. He had found a connection, a spark of something new and unexpected, and he knew, with a growing sense of anticipation, that this was just the beginning, a bridge of music. Pastor Kinuthia found himself drawn back to whispers again and again. He couldn't explain the pull he felt, the strange magnetism that drew him to the dimly lit bar with its scent of stale beer and lingering perfume. It wasn't the atmosphere, certainly, nor was it the clientele, a motley crew of night owls and weary souls seeking solace at the bottom of a bottle. No, it was Amina, her voice a siren call he couldn't ignore. He would sit in his usual corner, nursing a glass of water, his Bible a silent companion on the table beside him. He wouldn't speak much, preferring to observe, to absorb the atmosphere of the place that seemed so foreign, yet strangely comforting. He watched the patrons, their faces etched with the weariness of their lives, their laughter a brief respite from the daily grind. And then Amina would take the stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. And the world, with all its complexities and contradictions, would fade away. It was just him and her, connected by an invisible thread of music that transcended the smoky haze and the clinking glasses. He still couldn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. Her voice, rich and expressive, spoke a language that needed no translation. He heard the echoes of his own struggles in her songs, the yearning for something more, the search for meaning in a world that often seemed devoid of it. News of Pastor Kinuthia's unusual haunt spread through the town of Karatina like wildfire in a dry season. Tongues wagged, heads shook, and whispers followed him like shadows. The elders of his church, their faces creased with concern, approached him with caution, their words veiled in concern, but laced with disapproval. "Pastor," Elder Kamau began, his voice a low rumble, "we've heard rumors about your whereabouts after dark." Pastor Kinuthia met his gaze, his expression unreadable. He knew what they were getting at, these pillars of his community, these keepers of church tradition. "Whispers," he said, the word hanging in the air between them. "A place of ill repute, Pastor," Elder Wanjuku chimed in, her voice sharp with disapproval. "A den of iniquity, not a place for a man of God." Pastor Kinuthia listened patiently, his silence a testament to the respect he held for his elders. He understood their concerns, their fear that he was straying from the righteous path, that he was risking his reputation, his flock, his very soul. "It is not the place that defines the man," he said finally, his voice calm but firm, "but the man that defines the place. I go there to listen, to learn, to offer solace where it is needed." His words hung in the air, a challenge to their preconceived notions, a testament to his unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of all people, regardless of their circumstances. The elders, though unconvinced, couldn't deny the truth in his words. They had witnessed firsthand the depth of his faith, the sincerity of his sermons, the unwavering compassion he showed to all who sought his guidance. Still, the weight of tradition, the unspoken rules that governed their small community, pressed down on them, threatening to suffocate the very spirit of understanding they sought. "But the people, Pastor?" Elder Kamau persisted, his voice laced with concern. "They talk, they whisper, they fear for your soul." Pastor Kinuthia sighed, the weight of their expectations heavy on his shoulders. He knew the power of gossip, the way it could twist and distort the truth, turning a sanctuary into a sin, a song into a seduction. He thought of Amina, her voice a beacon of hope in the darkness, her songs a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Could they not see the beauty in her art, the pain that fueled her passion? Could they not hear the echoes of their own struggles in her melodies, the universal language of the human heart? He longed to share this understanding with them, to bridge the gap between their world of rigid piety and Amina's world of raw emotion. But he knew that some bridges could only be built one stone at a time, with patience, understanding, and unwavering faith. Days turned into weeks, the rainy season giving way to the dry heat of the summer. Pastor Kinuthia found himself torn between the familiar comfort of his church and the intoxicating allure of whispers. He felt like a man caught between two worlds, two identities, two versions of himself. There was the Pastor Kinuthia, the man of God, the shepherd guiding his flock towards salvation, the man who spoke of love, forgiveness, and the unwavering power of faith. And then there was the Michael that Amina's music awakened in him, a man wrestling with doubt, questioning his convictions, yearning for a connection that transcended the boundaries of his strictly defined world. He couldn't deny the peace he found in Amina's presence, the way her music soothed his soul, but he also couldn't ignore the whispers, the judging eyes, the weight of his community's expectations. He knew he couldn't live a double life forever. He had to make a choice. One evening, as he stood at the pulpit, his Bible open before him, he looked out at the faces of his congregation. He saw their faith, their hope, their unwavering belief in him, their shepherd. And in that moment, he knew he couldn't keep a part of himself hidden any longer. He had a story to tell, a story of music and faith, of doubt and discovery, of an unlikely connection that challenged everything he thought he knew. He took a deep breath and began to speak. A confession unveiled. The air in the church felt heavy, thick with anticipation as Pastor Kinuthia began to speak. He abandoned his prepared sermon, the one about the prodigal son that seemed so inadequate now, so distant from the turmoil in his own heart. He spoke instead of music, of its power to move the soul, to speak a language that transcended words. He spoke of Amina, of her voice that echoed the cries of the human heart, of her songs that spoke of pain and hope, of love lost and found. He told them of his visits to whispers, the bar he had once considered a den of iniquity, now a sanctuary in its own right. He spoke of the people he met there, their faces etched with the weariness of their lives, their laughter a testament to the enduring spirit of hope. He spoke of the comfort he found in their midst, the unexpected solace he found in a place so different from his own. He spoke of his struggle, the internal conflict that raged within him, the struggle between the man of God he was called to be and the man he was discovering himself to be. He spoke of the doubt, the questioning, the fear that gnawed at his faith. He confessed his attraction to Amina, not just to her music, but to the woman herself, her strength, her vulnerability, her unwavering spirit in the face of adversity. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths, shattering the silence that had descended upon the church. He had laid bare his soul before them, his confession a fragile offering, a plea for understanding in a world that often seemed determined to judge. Judgment and condemnation. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation, followed by a stunned silence so profound it felt as if the very walls of the church were holding their breath. Faces, etched with shock and disbelief, turned to one another, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves in a sudden wind. The elders, their faces frozen in expressions of betrayal and dismay, exchanged uneasy glances, their carefully constructed world tilting precariously on its axis. Then, as the shock subsided, the whispers grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of judgment and condemnation. Pastor Kinuthia, standing alone at the pulpit, felt the weight of their disapproval crashing down upon him, suffocating him, threatening to extinguish the flicker of hope that had ignited within him. Accusatory fingers pointed, their whispers like venomous darts piercing his heart. "He's lost his way," they muttered, their voices laced with disappointment and fear. "He's been seduced by the devil's music," they hissed, their words echoing the age-old fear of that which they didn't understand. The elders, their faces grim, approached the pulpit, their silence more damning than any words they could have uttered. Elder Kamau, his brow furrowed with concern, spoke first, his voice a low rumble that resonated with the weight of church tradition. Pastor Kinuthia listened to their pronouncements of disappointment, their warnings of eternal damnation, their pleas for him to repent, to renounce the path he had chosen. Yet even as their words rained down upon him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had done nothing wrong. He had simply spoken his truth, shared the journey of his soul, however unconventional it might seem. He had hoped for understanding, for a glimmer of recognition in their eyes, a reflection of the grace and compassion he preached every Sunday. But he realized, with a sinking heart, that some bridges were not meant to be built, some gaps too wide to cross. He had stumbled upon a chasm that separated their world of rigid piety from Amina's world of raw emotion, and his attempt to bridge that chasm had only served to widen it further. He looked out at the faces of his congregation, the people he had shepherded, comforted, and guided for so long, and he saw a coldness in their eyes that chilled him to the bone. The trust he had built, the bond they had shared, seemed to crumble before him, replaced by a wall of suspicion and fear. He knew then that he couldn't stay, not anymore, not when his presence cast a shadow of doubt upon their faith, when his honesty threatened the very foundations of their beliefs. He had to choose, and the choice was tearing him apart. Pastor Kinuthia stood before his congregation, his heart heavy with the weight of their judgment. He looked out at their faces, once so familiar, now distorted by suspicion and fear. He had spoken his truth, and in doing so, he had shattered the fragile illusion of their shared reality. He had dared to challenge their carefully constructed world, and the consequences of his honesty were etched on their faces. "I cannot be the shepherd you want me to be," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of his conviction. "Not anymore." He stepped away from the pulpit, the symbol of his authority, his identity, now a heavy burden he could no longer bear. He walked down the aisle, his gaze fixed straight ahead, ignoring the gasps and whispers that followed him like shadows. He didn't look back, couldn't bear to see the disappointment, the betrayal in their eyes. He had chosen his path, a path fraught with uncertainty and doubt. Yet, it was the only path that felt true. As he stepped out of the church, the weight of his decision pressing down on him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving behind more than just a building, a congregation, a way of life. He was leaving behind a part of himself, the part that had found solace in certainty, in the unwavering belief in a singular truth. He was stepping into the unknown, armed only with his faith, his honesty, and the echo of a melody that promised solace in the most unexpected of places. The night was cool, the air thick with the scent of jacaranda blossoms, as Pastor Kinuthia made his way to Whispers. He had nowhere else to go, no other haven in the storm that raged within him. He felt adrift, unmoored from the life he had known for so long, the life that now seemed like a distant, faded tapestry. The familiar sounds of laughter and music spilled out into the night as he approached the bar, beckoning him closer. He hesitated at the entrance, a wave of uncertainty washing over him. He felt exposed, vulnerable, stripped bare of the title, the position that had once defined him. He was just Michael now, a man seeking solace in the most unlikely of places. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, the familiar warmth of the place enveloping him like a comforting embrace. The usual patrons, a mix of familiar faces and strangers, greeted him with curious glances, their whispers a low hum against the backdrop of music. He saw Amina on stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, her voice a beacon in the darkness. And for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was craving. He made his way to his usual corner, his steps lighter than they had been in weeks. He didn't need words, not now. The music was enough. Amina's voice weaving a tapestry of emotions that resonated deep within him. He closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him, cleansing him, reminding him of the beauty that still existed in the world, even in the darkest of times. The night deepened, the music flowing like a river, carrying Pastor Kinuthia along its currents. He watched Amina as she sang, her voice raw with emotion, her body swaying to the rhythm of the music. He saw the pain in her eyes, the echoes of a life lived on the fringes, the resilience of a spirit that refused to be broken. And in that moment, he understood. He saw her not as the temptress the elders had warned him about, but as a fellow traveler on life's uncertain path. A kindred spirit searching for meaning, for connection, for a glimmer of hope in the darkness. He saw the reflection of his own struggles in her music, the yearning for something more, the questioning, the doubt that gnawed at the edges of faith. He saw her then, not just as a singer, but as a storyteller, her songs a tapestry woven from the threads of her own experiences, her own pain, her own triumphs. He realized that music wasn't just an escape, as he had once believed, but a language, a way of communicating the deepest truths of the human heart, truths that transcended the boundaries of language, culture, and even faith. As the last notes of Amina's song faded away, a profound silence descended upon the bar. And in that silence, Pastor Kinuthia felt a shift within himself, a realignment of his beliefs. He knew then that he hadn't lost his faith, as he had feared. He had simply found it in a different form, a form that resonated with the rhythm of his own heart. The bar emptied slowly, the usual patrons bidding each other good night, their voices hushed, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. Pastor Kinuthia remained in his corner, lost in thought, the remnants of Amina's music still swirling around him. He felt a presence beside him and looked up to see Amina standing there. Her stage persona shed, replaced by a quiet vulnerability that tugged at his heart. "You understand," she said simply, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of shared experience. "My music, you hear it." Pastor Kinuthia nodded, his own voice failing him. He didn't need words to express the depth of his understanding. The way her music had touched his soul, awakened something within him that he had thought long dormant.